All right, hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. This is Filecoin Core Devs call number 43 today on Thursday, June 2nd. Happy June. And this is meeting 1 of 2. So today we plan to go through our standard implementation team updates, and we're also going to go over some proposals for the new Filecoin request for comment, which Brenda from the Boost team has joined us to discuss, and also go over some proposed changes to the structure of the Core Devs call to be a little bit more productive going forward. Then, of course, we'll also talk about the current V16 network upgrade and the next V17 network upgrade. And if there's time at the end, we can obviously bring any open discussion items that anyone may have. So with that, Lee, do you want to give us an update from your team, or David?
I can give the update. So we've been making really good progress with the building actor test, and we are about done with the tests that were converted from Go, and we will continue assisting with the integration tests. But we will split our team in two. So some people will work on the integration test, and some people will move back on Forest to prepare for network 15, no, network 16. Yeah, and that's all the updates.
Great. I wanted to ask about this last bullet. Last I had heard, I know your team was not preparing to upgrade for us for V16, but the Lotus team had offered some additional resources. Are you planning on syncing on mainnet, or?
So yes. So it turns out that the problems that we were having in the past might have been due to like some internal bugs in the building actors that appear to have gone away or been fixed over the last month or so. So it seems that we don't have any more roadblocks, and that we can just go ahead for network 16. Oh,
great. That is wonderful. Cool. Well, sounds good. And thanks, Lotus team, too, I guess. Lotus team, you want to go next?
Lotus team updates will be boring. We ship another feature release, our monthly release in May, including a couple bug fixes, like not much to mention. We have been working on network V60 upgrade, code freeze FVM RC2, and we released a pre-tag to upgrade the butterfly, which happened this Tuesday, right? This Tuesday, it went quite smoothly. Nothing major happened. We are working with like Lotus TSCs and a couple committee members to do more like testings over the next week. The next week, and then we will be preparing the first official like code freeze RC1, including the calibration upgrade dates. We are looking at the week of, sorry, I'm just looking at my calendar, of like 13th to do the calibration upgrade. So far, we are still targeting, I think we are on track of upgrading mainnet at the end of like late June or early July, depending on how the week looks. The biggest blocker today is like code freeze for actor, which is highly dependent on the testing coverage of actor, but the Forest team and Sang is like working really hard on that. Though thank you for all the support for the Forest team. We are hoping to wrap everything up by the end of next week. From my understanding, we need a little bit push to make that happen, but still looking quite comfortable on this timeline so far. Yes, anything to add? No, thank you.
Great. Any questions for the Lotus team about any of their work, but especially the network timeline? Okay. So as usual, the Venus team isn't going to join us this morning, but their updates are pretty standard from weeks past as well. Just released a new version of Venus cluster, continuing to integrate the FVM, and they plan to join mainnet at the end of June or early July, as Jennifer mentioned. And they've also made some small adjustments to the Venus market module as well. They're going to continue to test for V16, move over to Butterfly Net, and continue to make some of those module enhancements that they've been working on for the past couple of months as well. Any questions that you'd like me to relay over to the Venus team? All right, great. Then there should be no surprises on this slide today. Parth is continuing to handle bug bounties, but there are no pending security issues or concerns that we need to let you all know about. For governance, there's been no big changes in the FIPS currently. We have 5 accepted FIPS, 4 of which we are going to be introducing in V16, as you all know. There are no FIPS currently in last call, and we do have a couple of large drafts, many of them from Alex North, who I think is going to present some of his new proposals in 2 weeks, so at Core Devs meeting 44. And we're also going to talk about sort of implications for 2 of these drafts, potentially the Ask V2 protocol, but the index or advertisement protocol as well, and also Boost, which does not have any kind of FIP draft or governance documentation yet, but which likewise will fall potentially under this new Filecoin request for comment model that we're working on right now. Any questions about FIPS before we segue into that topic? All right. Oops, I think I put these out of order. But we can talk about the network v16. As Jennifer mentioned, Butterfly Net has been upgraded, and we're looking at late June, potentially early July for the overall network upgrade. Jennifer, anything you want to add?
We are still on track. Again, in a week and a half, in 2 weeks, coverage upgrade late June, early July. We want to do the mainnet upgrade. I do want to say that again, this is a huge upgrade in the network. The Lotus team and the many other teams, I'm sure that along with the community, we are planning to stay a little bit on call kinda post upgrade. So if you have any issue with the current suggested timeline, let us know, and we would love to work with the whole community to make sure this upgrade work as smooth as possible.
And there's only 2 teams on the call today, so yeah, Lee, do you have a question?
No, I just, yeah, okay, Jennifer answered.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Anyone else from the Forest team, any concerns, questions, anything you want to raise? I know it's, I mean, a huge network upgrade, lots of testing, really important changes happening, but obviously because of that sort of a tentative timeline, want to make sure that you have the opportunity to raise anything which you think the group can answer for you. All right. Then as we think about V16 and plan for it, Jennifer also started a discussion post for network V17. And right now it seems like there's 2 sort of different sort of schools of thought emerging about what would be best for this upgrade. One is Jennifer's proposal, which she can speak about, sort of a smaller community upgrade to get the broader Filecoin community used to upgrading under the FVM. And the other is sort of saying that this isn't really necessary, that they can sort of onboard to any new procedures during V16, and that V17 should be sort of a FIP-packed large upgrade, as all of our other recent upgrades have been. So we certainly have a few more weeks to sort of figure out which direction we want to go. And I think we're going to end up back at that question that Ayush has been asking for a few months about how do we scope the size of appropriate network upgrades. But wanted to sort of start that conversation here as well and see if anybody has any preferences or opinions they wanted to share.
So just want to give everyone here an update, like after I proposed a very small like practice upgrade, like since the last quarter, I've been chatting with different parties a little bit more about the idea. I think I got like a mixed like feedbacks, which some of I agree. It's like, it's also possible that 2 things. First is like the community and the implementation team should be ready for this such a small upgrade to have to happen post the upgrade in case any network incident is introduced by the new actor or FVM. So that can be our practice already. So like implementation team should already be preparing a sort of like a run book how we want to be responsive when certain one situation occurs. And then the other thing is like, is it the effort worth it for doing a practice? Because like, you have to work with the risk there is like, maybe the storage provider community can be more responsive with like two very close upgrade. Would be the other stakeholders, for example, exchanges, applications, all those parties are also be responsive and like be ready for two upgrades? The answer is like unknown. So that's why let's like keep discussing. I'm wondering how Lee and other teams like think about that. But like I'm personally, I'm okay to say maybe we can skip the small practice one and working on a larger scope one, but like we need more discussion on the scope. But yeah, Lee, any thoughts?
Yeah, so from what I'm understanding, after the NV16 upgrade, you guys want to have some form of buffer in case things go wrong, to kind of, if we need to roll back certain things or fix any bugs for related to the FVM upgrade, right? That's one. And the other one is for NV17, I glimpsed for the FIPs that was there. One is like an address change. One was like something like an ENS kind of stuff on the Filecoin network, and another one was something on the, I forgot clearly. So these are the three things that you guys have proposed for now, right? Am I understanding?
I think there's more being added by the protocol opportunity team. However, a lot of things are like protocol changes, like implementation effort is like minimal. So yeah, I think what Lotus team is saying today is like, Caitlin bring up a very good point. It's like we should figure out each team's resource like allocation we can have in Q3 before we define the scope. So for Lotus side, for now, we are okay to say we will have like at least 2 engineers to commit 60% of like capacity across Q3 to support this like upgrade. So this is from our side. Obviously, based on like how if M2 scope changes, how Lotus maintenance scope changes, we may have more later, but so far this is what we are comfortable like commit to. So those 2 engineers can be working on both built-in actor and Lotus implementation.
Yeah, okay. David, do you have an idea on how much or when can we get to NV16 at this point?
Right now, I do not. I'm still surprised that the issues that we have been having have been fixed by the Lotus team. So yeah, I don't have any estimates for like when we'll be able to join the Network 16.
Yeah. Okay, so perhaps once we have a clear idea on where we will be in NV16, we can then probably state with more clarity how much scope of the work we can handle. At this point, personally, I would say smaller the scope better, because we've been working on the NV16 upgrade, and we're still a little behind on that by default. So smaller scope would be better for NV17, but if we make it to NV16 in a timely manner without any problem. Yes, Caitlin, I think I mentioned about the scope, and the other one I mentioned about the timeline. Yeah, and I kind of forgot what was the other one. But yeah, that's kind of, if we make it, in conclusion, if we make it sooner with the NV16 upgrade, we would be able to we'll be in a better position to say. But right now, I think the smaller scope would help for NV17, if that makes sense to you guys. I know I kept on repeating a few things, so if you guys want clarity, I can repeat again.
I think that sounds good. I think we will have to begin to make some more concrete decisions about which types of FIPS will be included in this, and also what our initial projected timeline might look like in the next meeting or two. But as we've seen this time also, those things are subject to change. Also, sorry, Lee, I know I distracted you with the message while you're talking. I suppose my question, and I think this is for Jennifer, but you may not know yet either. When we think about what a larger FIP upgrade may look like, I assume most of those are some of the recent proposals that have come from the think protocol opportunities team, correct? None of those are the next milestone for the FVM, correct?
We really think the refactor system actor one can be super beneficial. You can pay a lot of like tech debt, and put FVM M2, set a good foundation for FVM M2. So we really want to consider that. Protocol opportunity team was like holding off that because of the resource issue, but now like Lotus may help there. So yeah, might be back to the table. But like that one will be a big one. A lot of like code refactoring. Yeah. And the other one, FIPS like 0034 is a very small one and it doesn't require any implementation work. Beneficiary address one, I believe the Go version is already existed, coded by Venus team. I'm on the assumption that Venus will do the built-in actor one. We will see how that goes. That one will need some like kind of implementation support just to expose that feature for the users. But that's mostly on the storage like miner side of the things. That's the node. Domain separation of signatures. Yes, that's a thing that Lotus kind of want to do. And we just have a discussion this morning. We will be, Geoff, newest member of Lotus team, will open a FIP discussion soon and seeking for ideas on how we handle this. We still have some like unsolved questions on how we can introduce that to Filecoin. So like we will ask for first and other implementation team idea later as well. I'm not too sure about the system design discussion was. Let me take a look.
It's the same, I think, the domain separation, I think.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So from what I'm understanding, the FIP 0034 doesn't require node implementations to get involved, correct? And and FIP 0029 Venus team is spearheading that process. And the third one, sorry, what?
I assume that, I'm not sure.
Okay,
I can confirm with them this afternoon. I'll ask.
Okay. And the third one is basically where we kind of want some discussion around and see basically. So okay, so this seems, I think, like a smaller scope in general, unless people start adding tens of FIPs.
I think there are a couple tickets being created in built-in actor and like a couple new FIPs being proposed by protocol opportunity teams in the thread already. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess we can discuss those next time and see where the scope lies then. Yeah.
I do want to say let's like try to define the scope as soon as possible and lock it down so that we can work on a precise timeline for the B17. I think it's important for us to not expand the scope, as we go. I think it's important for the team.
I agree with this. One challenge on my end related to the scope is that there are a lot of projects in the works that have not been fully communicated yet, either as FIP drafts or to like me directly. So I'm going to touch base with Alex and the protocol opportunities team and also poke around and make sure that there's no other big FIP drafts that teams are working on that they expect to land that we're not currently aware of. And I'll try and update the thread that you started on GitHub, Jennifer, about B17 with all of the potential FIPs that we could include, just so we have a single point of reference. But I think, Lee, your list here is most of it. Yeah.
I think one thing can be super helpful is like to have like kind of like a submission deadline kind of thing of like the scope of like a V17. And I think Alex is aware of that, but like let's double confirm with that team. I also think crypto econ team may have some ideas, so I will reach out there as well. And maybe a governance thing that we should set up is like, of course, we want to be reactive like on the FIPs being proposed, but like we should have a scope of the things that can be expedited across the FIP process in the scope definition.
Yeah, so one thing we've also been discussing, and this is not unfortunately something that we could do for V17, I don't believe there's not enough time, but one way we could think about scoping the size of FIPS upgrades is to actually put together an implementation plan before the FIP draft is accepted. So that way we can forward project the amount of capacity needed for varying engineering teams to actually implement on top of regular maintenance and enhancement work. So this is something that Lee and I have been looking at and we'll continue to kind of poke around with. But Yeah, I agree. We need to kind of figure it out sooner rather than later, even if other elements for V17 are undecided.
Yeah, I liked what Jennifer said, have a strict deadline to submit the FIPS and then lock down the scope. I would also suggest that if some of these FIPs are proposed by other teams, that we use one of the core dev calls to basically talk about that FIP and maybe they can present it. So for example, I'm not sure if Venus team did it for the FIP 0029, they might have at some point in time. Or if the other FIPs that we're going to include in the NB17, we could use a presentation and give some feedback and also receive some more understanding of that FIP. That would be really helpful, specifically if it's for node implementation.
Yeah, so all teams are required to present their FIPS before they can be accepted. So Stephen's FIP 29, this was presented months ago. The challenge is that like FIPS do take months. And so sometimes you get the presentation and you're like, okay, great, sounds fine. And then when it comes to actually implementing, you do not retain any of that information. And it's unrealistic to expect you to go back and like rewatch those videos. So we can talk about ways to like make sure that we have, I think, just like better representation, especially for folks who frequently author FIPS, so that they can continue to kind of speak to their FIPS the way I think Raul did really effectively with the 3 FVM FIPS. But the one thing I do want to note about the like hard deadline for FIPS is that we don't have preset upgrade timelines or upgrade quarters because we want to be reactive. The same thing with FIPS. I'm cautious about a deadline only because our upgrade timelines do shift, and it's not to say that, as we shift timelines, we're willing to accept more FIPS, but it's just to say that like FIPS process should be long and people should be indicating their work much sooner in the process than they are currently. So one challenge that I'm trying to work around or address directly is getting people to indicate the work that they are doing that will require a FIP in advance of them having a fully complete draft that they've already scoped and tested. That will make it so that we don't get any of these kind of like last minute fully fledged FIPS that research teams expect to be fully implemented right away. But this is sort of a learning challenge that we've had with just sort of the scale of the Filecoin ecosystem and the fact that FIPS come from so many different directions. But I do think that once we do set a scope and agree on it, even I think in the next meeting, we should not change it. And it should be clear that there is not room for additional changes under this current planning.
Yeah, so if we want to be flexible with the process, which I understand we need to be to a certain extent, what we could do is something like, okay, now we know that network 16 is getting into place, right? So during this time, we can allocate 4 to 6 weeks till the network 16 is finalized to get the FIPs for 17, and not like 2 months from now for 17. And when network 17 is in place, during that time we can have like a cushion time of again 4 to 6 weeks or whatever that time for the network 18, and that could work well if we use that as a as a baseline for that. That's just a suggestion on my end. Yeah.
I think like one practice or like maybe a little bit of restructure of like this core dev meeting I would love to see core devs to practice on is like, for us, like we have been just like looking at the FIPS and say, oh, it sounds like a good idea, we should like include it, and that's how we are doing this. But like, ideally, I want us to leverage this call with all the engineers to actually evaluate the FIPS more and see what does it like benefit the network, like what opportunities does it like unlock for the network, and prioritize them those way. We shouldn't be like defining the scope solely on, okay, this takes less implementation time to work on. Like even the smallest FIP will take some engineering resources. However, if we can spend that resources on a high priority, high opportunity FIPS, maybe we should do that. So that's another thing that like I would propose, is to have more developers actually joining this call, talk about the FIPS from a technical perspective, and before we make any decisions, I think.
So that's a great segue into talking about, we'll jump around and talk about some proposed changes to the core devs calls, because I think this touches on some challenges we've been having. And it's also something that Lee and I have been talking about over the past couple of weeks in particular. Yeah, Yeah, Jennifer, I couldn't have like created a better audience plant. That was a great segue. But I think the problem we have now is that this call is mostly just implementers, right? Which is obviously really important. But again, that creates these sort of black boxes around what other teams are doing. We have really inconsistent attendance from like other developers in the Filecoin ecosystem, even though they are really involved in governance in sort of an async manner. It's difficult to have like robust conversations. We're used to speaking with each other because we do very frequently. But again, it's sort of that interplay between different teams and people working on different aspects of Filecoin that makes this really productive. And it's hard to say that like there is a very clear value or purpose for the core devs call other than sort of touching base and checking in when we don't have that participation. So one thing that Lee and I discussed as like a potential solution is actually changing the structure of the call to be much more structured. So it would become a monthly meeting, not bi-weekly, and we would probably have it for about an hour and a half. Core devs would be recognized as more privileged roles. So we would work together as a group. I have a feeling Jennifer, Lee, and I would kind of vet this list. Where core dev is a designation that people sort of receive. You receive it by being invited to the meeting, and there would be attendance requirements. So if you miss 3 meetings or whatever within a period of time, for example, you will be removed from the meeting going forward. This is a structure that all of the storage provider working groups use and the Filecoin Plus governance team uses, and it's a good way to kind of reinforce the idea that you should be participating in this meeting if you have the privilege to attend. And also creating clear standards and a more formalized agenda. So moving away from doing updates, which people should know where to find those things within Slack, but having more broader conversations with greater facilitation so that we can be talking about those FIP drafts over time, that we can have big planning decisions. And because again, this is only going to be happening on a monthly basis, there is more of an emphasis on having teams who do come be prepared for the meeting, understand the materials that are going to be presented in advance, and also be ready to sort of contribute to conversations about implementation pathways, about security needs, or about whatever that high value, high work reward sort of formula is going to be for different FIPs that are open for upgrades. So any immediate thoughts, concerns, or other ideas about this?
Yeah, you mentioned there's a poor definition of a core dev, and there's an assumption that core devs hold visible leadership within the ecosystem, right? So could you clarify on that a little bit?
Yeah, so we say a core dev is anyone who's invited to join this call, but there's not much of a definition beyond that. Usually the ones that I've leaned on in the past is saying that a core dev is anyone who is responsible for, making or implementing changes or proposing changes to sort of those like core consensus dependent activities within the network. But the definition is sort of open, and I don't think everyone has a really clear understanding of what it is. And historically, this hasn't really mattered, right? But going forward, and what we're going to talk about at the end of the call today is going to be this, this Filecoin request for comment, which specifically asks core devs to make decisions about what standards ought to be adopted. So instead of doing this more kind of open and unstructured community process, which we use for FIPS, it's going to be pretty clear, cut and dry, kind of vote in the meeting, and that's that. And as we kind of give that authority to core devs, we want them to be like a clearly defined group as well. But I think it's true by definition, and also in other ecosystems, that core devs, again, that's a privileged role. And if you are a core dev, it's because you are making some of the most important and deep contributions to this ecosystem. And so you should be, that is a leadership position, right?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts about this. Thanks for kicking off the this thread. Broadly agree with some of the outline, with most of the outline here. And I do think we have some changes that need to be made. My chief concern is how do people who are not core devs, who have one-off suggestions, and we've had a lot of these conversations in the past, right, where someone who has a lot of insight into VM design on blockchains wanted to join the call and share their opinions in sync and have a one-on-one conversation, or not one-on-one, but have a conversation about that specific topic. So I want to make sure that that forum continues for people, both active members of the community as well as just people flying by who have a lot of germane experience to share. So that's one flag. The other thing is, yeah, I think a monthly meeting probably makes sense. I feel like the value of the core dev call, or at least the amount that I kind of take away, certainly fluctuates a lot as we get very close to network upgrades. There's a lot of like closer coordination, handing off, and right now teams are working more closely with each other than ever before. A bunch of the Forest team is working with a bunch of the Lotus team on testing this shared resource and so on. Whereas when we are further away from a network upgrade, then sometimes there's less less activity, I suppose. So I'd want to make sure. So I'm interested, I guess, in that last point on what you're envisioning in the how do we coordinate updates and small needs in weekly collaborative Scrum meetings, so that we can maintain that close coordination when needed, and then the core dev meeting can be, something we give a lot of attention to, and everyone takes, treats as important, and we can have these good conversations there.
Yeah, I think those are great questions. So yeah, to your point about people who are not core devs being able to contribute, we want that to continue. Brenda is not usually a core dev, but she's here because she has something to discuss with us. So I think that's great. We should have advisors, and we should allow people to come in as observers or whatever you want to call them. The process would be the same. If you want to come, just ask and we can add you if it's relevant. I think the reason we would sort of gate the meeting for core devs more formally really has to do with instilling the sense of like, if you are invited to this, you need to attend. So it's not to say that we want to do this to like restrict participation, like keep others out. We want to actually like get people to come in, participate, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And for the second one, so this is, I think, one of the things that is like most up in the air and uncertain, but the reason we have these proposed changes here actually started with this bottom post about how can we better coordinate amongst ourselves as things move so quickly. So one thing is, actually this is like very variable, but something that Lee and I had discussed and that he had asked for in a certain way was the idea of like doing more team check-ins on sort of an agile way. So having 15 or 20 minute stand-ups at the end of the week, for example, just for teams to check in, less formal than I think the 30-minute biweekly meetings that are sometimes used, and also a little bit clearer than having to rely on Slack, which I think for all of us can get very overwhelming at times, especially as we near big work changes like a network upgrade. But again, this is open, and this is more for implementation teams to decide. So if we move to sort of a monthly meeting format, we want to make sure that people are still able to communicate their needs, because we know that they happen in more than a monthly kind of fashion. And so it's just to say, if we reduce access to this meeting, we cut it in half, the number of times it's held, we want to make sure that there are still like plenty of forums already in place for people to continue the conversations that they need to get their work done.
Makes sense. What about time zones with that, given?
I know.
Yeah.
I know. I don't know.
Yeah.
So the 2 meeting structure is not working. The second meeting right now is only myself, Alex North, and Stephen. It's great to talk to the 2 of them. The 3 of us kind of usually hang out on those calls and just sort of chit chat, but it is not a core devs call. It's not productive. And it also creates, I think, a chasm between the things everyone wants to talk about and needs to talk about. Lotus and Forest work really closely together. Venus is obviously important, but hasn't been working as close. They should be, or they should at least have the opportunity. Alex North is authoring a ton of really high value FIPS. He should be able to have a conversation with a broader group and not just myself and Stephen. So potentially what we could do is on that monthly basis, we could alternate between what in North America is an evening time and a morning time. But I think hopefully also reducing it to 1 month means so that if it's sort of inconvenient for your time zone, that it's at least only once a month.
Well, once every 2 months, right? If you're, because you have one convenient and one inconvenient. So once every 2 months, I have to attend a meeting at 8 o'clock. I think I can live with that personally.
Yeah. If we do the alternation, it's only once every 2 months. I'd also be happy to take a morning meeting if we need to. So
Yeah, and to add to Caitlin's, and the other general idea is that, like, at least for myself and the Forest team, I'm assuming that I think it was really helpful to just sync, right, on a stand-up basis, even if it was for 5 minutes, just on a day-to-day. And I think that's something Node implementators could do, so that we are not really waiting for the core devs call, which is happening 1 month to sync. So just sync on a weekly basis for 10 minutes, right? And kind of keep that routine going. I think that really helps to get things into consensus. That's what I think the last line is here. Implementers should consider updates and small needs in weekly collaborative Scrum meetings.
I think that having Forest and Lotus joining the same like a stand-up like daily on the shared effort on like test coverage it's been super helpful. And I think we should just create ad hoc like shared stand-ups as the collaboration project goes. If we have a shared project, I think we should do more stand up together. That makes sense. However, if there's no shared project, I think maybe bi-weekly, maybe the engineers and the TPMs can get together and have a 15 minutes quick sync. It makes sense. Suggesting a less frequent frequency, because a lot of time, unless it's urgent network upgrades, Lotus has a lot of maintenance work or Lotus project that I would imagine Forest doesn't really care about. But I still think we should sync, because some of the ideas we have, we would love to share with Forest or Venus or other teams, and see maybe we can create collaboration opportunities. So let's say maybe we start with bi-weekly. If we have a lot of content to share, we can increase the frequency to weekly, just to start with.
Yeah, and I think the value of these weekly, bi-weekly scrums will be potentially more useful when we're not in the network upgrade sprinting phase, because when we're working towards a network upgrade, we're talking to each other because we have to be aligned. Whereas when we're not actively moving towards something, it'll be good to stay in touch, align, especially now that we have built-in hackers and FVM as shared commodities for all our teams. I think it'll be useful to, this is what's going on in our relevant areas, and there's opportunity for cross-team innovation there.
Just for example, Lotus is thinking about a Lotus project for light node and things like that. And when I talked to Sam Ground Zero, and he is very interested in how Forest may have a light node, and I feel different implementation can have different purpose, the main use case of it. And these are the ideas I would love to discuss in such thing, just to inspire each other a little bit, maybe fun, I guess.
Also, nothing will inspire people to get those sort of annoying administrative tasks out of the way more than having a one-on-one sprint check-in with another team.
So what kind of annoying administrative tasks are we thinking?
Oh no, those little things that you tend to push, the communication stuff, the documentation stuff, the follow-up on small bugs and requests. Not you guys, but in general.
I don't know what you mean. I don't relate to this at all. I have never done that myself. How dare you? Yeah, very fair.
It's because you're too good. You're too good. Yeah.
I know. I think that's the point. And honestly, I'm starting to see that more and more as we have more people, at least speaking for Lotus, we generally have more people interested in our work, and so we're having the need to write down what we're doing a little bit more, and it's good for our own organization as well. Now we know what we're trying to get done in the next 2 weeks, or what we did get done in the past 2 weeks, and so on. So I'm on board with kind of us shared pushing each other towards that.
Good. So it sounds like. Oh, sorry, Jennifer.
About these scrums. If it's supposed to be engineering talk mostly, let's not talk about timeline and stuff TPM stuff too much in these calls. I think that will make engineers more enjoy these things more.
Yep, a great point. I think we can separate them out. And again, those kind of scrum needs or those ad hoc meeting requirements that your teams have, if it's expected that those kinds of planning things happen outside of this, it's easier for you to just make decisions about what you need in more of an ad hoc fashion. So I think it seems like people generally kind of agree that we need to kind of refresh the format a little bit. So I'll just write up the changes more formally, post it in the thread. Everyone can take a look and share reflections, whatever preferences, but we won't make any changes until after the network upgrade, just so that there's consistency for now. So with that said, I do want to jump to the last topic because we are reaching close to the end of the hour. But I wanted to make sure that we had time to talk about this and that Brenda could weigh in also, since she took time to join us this morning. But if you haven't seen, posted a proposal for the Filecoin request for comment procedure. If you haven't read through this, it's kind of long. It will take you 15-20 minutes. I would ask that you do because I think it's important. And the FRC is effectively a FIP light for non-consensus dependent protocol standards. So especially once the programmable FEM goes live, we're going to need builder standards, API standardization, all kinds of things that are really important for like a cohesive and integrated network, but which obviously don't require massive upgrades in order to implement. The FRC is the process that we would use in order to make those standards and implement those changes in sort of in a more open way. So there is a proposed workflow. It's very similar to the FIPS process. The only significant difference is one that we would want sort of broad adoption before declaring that something is a network standard. And the process of confirming that someone is or something is a network standard would actually fall to core devs, which is why, again, we want to revamp this meeting and make it as good as it can be. Brenda, I want to give you the opportunity to kind of weigh in on how we've discussed using this for Boost, maybe as a good example, or for you to ask any questions you may have also.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think for Boost, it's like, I've talked about this with Jennifer a little bit as well, but I think a lot of it is like encouraging people to upgrade to Boost, even though it's not like, it doesn't, yeah, it's not consensus breaking. It's basically the main, I guess, addition is to libp2p protocols in terms of how you can do storage deal making and look for a storage deal status. So yeah, I guess a lot of it here would be more like, hey, you know, as I guess the dev team who is working on markets, like how can we use FRC as a method or a way to kind of better publicize like the push that we want to have to encourage people to use Boost, since it has a lot of improvements based on the feedback that the storage provider community had given us around like the entire like markets stuff. And so, yeah, I guess for me, I'm just trying to figure out like what is the content that should be included in this FRC that could be actually like useful or like helpful to the core devs team and the community in general. It might not necessarily be super heavyweight, but yeah, we have like docs pages and stuff that could be helpful for people to see. But yeah, that's it for me. I'm just, yeah, trying to better understand like what is the information that that would be important or critical for us to have. Maybe we just like have a draft of an initial idea of what we think could be helpful, and then we can iterate from there or something like that.
I have a question because Brenda is here. I'm still having a little difficulty understanding how this FRC is different compared to something like a meta EIP or an informational EIP. I know that's more like a Ethereum level stuff, but it seems to me it's very similar, that more like informational or meta level stuff goes into it, or I'm just not understanding it well enough.
So I think that, oh, you go ahead, Brenda.
Go ahead. Oh, no, you go.
I think it's important to know that we don't like copy the Ethereum governance process, you know, word for word. So we do have informational FIPS. FIP 18 is the one that changed miner to storage provider, for example. And I think the logic holds that we don't have a lot of these, but they are for more sort of fundamental changes to the way the community operates. Another one I can think of is if there was like a meta governance proposal for Filecoin Plus, that would still need a FIP, for example. But the difference here is that a Filecoin request for comment is really a standard that has been, you know, sort of adopted or implemented in more of a sort of an ad hoc or more organic way. And all we're doing with the FRC is like indicating that this is a recognized best practice for the network. So it's not so much about like making a change, it's more about signifying cohesion. If that makes sense.
Yeah, like Yeah, I'm still trying to understand like what would be like a proper like an example use case. Maybe if you guys can talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like as an example with Boost, it's like we're introducing some new like they're actually the only, I guess, new thing that's being introduced with Boost is like the libp2p protocols in terms of how you can propose a storage deal and how you can basically check storage deal status. But other than that, like nothing really has changed. If you know what I mean, it's like, you know, the market's still like basically we have added like a new UI on top of like basically information that you might have around your storage deals. And you can actually see like how your funds are being worked. So there's like a nice UI. There's actually some additional methods that you can do data transfer from the storage provider side. So you can transfer data via HTTP instead of, you know, via just purely graph sync. And we're hoping to make more improvements in the Boost, I guess, like markets, like module around retrieval as well. And so I think the goal here is like, hey, we want to encourage people to move to use Boost over the existing market subsystem, even though like technically I guess, you know, it's like you don't necessarily have to move, but we want to encourage people to move because all the new improvements and new features will be added in the Boost system. However, like all the changes that are made in Boost don't actually affect consensus. Like it's not like anything different necessarily happens on chain. It's just the way that the storage provider is communicating with the client. Like you can have additional ways to like move your data around, right? And so that type of stuff is not actually like, I guess it doesn't impact the stuff that you see on chain, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm getting, so from what I'm understanding is like the behavioral changes that requires, you know, users to adopt a new kind of system or like just user changes. I think that's what I'm getting at. Behavioral user changes can go through the FRC, which is not necessarily an FIP because FIP is more like a technical change to the protocol. Is that correct to say here?
I think it is. I think another way to think about differentiating these is kind of like the role of like community consent, right? So like with FIPS, these are big fundamental changes. And the way we organize this is around, you know, here's a proposal. Now we go through the process of like stewarding it around, getting feedback, and we get that consent for the change by asking people to weigh in. With the FRC is we're saying, hey, the community is doing this thing organically and we think it's good. We think either it's a technical change, it's protocol, you know, it makes Filecoin work better or more intuitively, or it could be something else, right? For example, but it's to say we recognize this adoption and we want to like draw reference to it so that if there's new developers coming to the network or whatever, they also can like quickly find what is a best practice for everyone.
It's like the token standard. It's like if you have the token standard that's adopted by the communities and the wallet tooling that's built on top of Filecoin can just like look into this standard and know like what they need to support so that they can interact as with as many token contracts as possible. However, you can still have like multiple token contract, right? Like if you don't like the current one, you can propose another one, you can deploy your own. It's just maybe it's not like supported by the most like common tooling in the ecosystem team. So like it's similar with like the markets protocol. It's just to make sure the market client implementation can talk to as many as like storage provider implementation as possible in the market, so they can make deals with each other, get data like stored. That's the idea, I think, for the standard, I think.
Yeah,
makes sense. So for example, the way I see it is like, for example, if we want to say, okay, to the community or to the Filecoin users, okay, we are having for 80% of the or 90% of the nodes on Lotus, so we are proposing an FRC for some of the node implementators to probably change to Forest or under node to increase network diversity. Could something go through this FRC process? If I'm understanding it correctly?
I would imagine if Forest has, for example, right, like have a new API endpoint, JSON-RPC API endpoint that Lotus doesn't have. However, the majority of the ecosystem community think that's like super helpful and put that into the API standard. Lotus should implement that sooner than later, is my personal take. Yeah.
So for example, with Boost, Lee, if, you know, we were to go, Boost is already being integrated into Venus, into Lotus, right? For example, we say, hey, this should be a network standard. This is like a great tool. The protocol changes are really useful, whatever. An FRC is implemented, it's accepted, whatever, this is considered a best practice. One, it's not a consensus issue. There's no on-chain change. So it would be up to the Forest team to like incorporate the protocol, right? Incorporate Boost into Forest on your own timeline, right? You wouldn't have to do it at any particular point. You should, because we're saying all the other implementations do, and this is something that benefits from having more people bought into it. But if you wanted to decide for product differentiation purposes or anything else that we don't want Boost, we actually want to create our own market module, whatever. In this context, I don't think that would make a lot of sense, but hypothetically speaking, you could do that and not sort of adhere to what the FRC recommends. It's more of a recommendation rather than a requirement.
Yeah, okay, got it. Yeah,
Yep.
Makes sense now. Yeah, thank you everyone for the clarification.
Cool. So I think those questions are really good and it's helpful to talk through. I'm gonna actually modify some of the language in the current post to make sure it's as clear as possible. But if you haven't read through it again, please do. Your feedback is super helpful. We're gonna try and find template requirements so that Brenda, we can move forward on pushing sort of Boost as the first sort of FRC draft. And aside from that, I think, I'm not sure about AskV2, but also the index or advertisement protocol that was presented by Hung Hao a few weeks ago, that will also be an FRC because it's, you know, sort of a indexer, but it's not something that everyone has to incorporate as part of a network upgrade, for example. All right. Any last questions about this or anything else that you'd like to bring up before we end today? All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Brenda, thanks for coming too. There's another meeting this afternoon or later this evening. If anyone else would like to join that one too, we'll go over these topics again. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to come. Otherwise, I think this was a really productive call today. So thanks everyone for your participation and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.